Bush administration has a detailed plan on how to deal with protesters. It's a manual, in fact, and apparently it is quite handy. Public awareness that there are written instructions distributed to staffers describing clever ways to make the bad dissenters go away surfaced as the result of a lawsuit filed by 2 protesters who had been arrested. On our third story in the countdown, the ABCs of marginalizing those pesky protesters, courtesy of the administration. The document is dated October 2002, and so it obviously predates the most vocal protests against this president and the Iraq War. But even back then, the White House manual was specific and closely held, titled Presidential Advance Manual. It was stamped sensitive, do not copy. It offers guidelines for staffers and volunteers at presidential public events. For example, those invited near the stage must be extremely supportive of the administration. Screen the crowd as they come in, looking for signs, especially folded cloth signs. Create rally squads of volunteers with large signs of favorable messages placed in strategic locations, looking for demonstrators. The rally squad's task is to shield the demonstrators from the main press platform. If demonstrators yell, rally squads should chant USA, USA, USA. As a last resort, security may remove demonstrators from event site. Enter Jeffrey and Nicole Rank, who wore these T-shirts at a Charleston, West Virginia event in July of 2004. The staff told them to cover the T-shirts or leave. When they refused, they were arrested. Local authorities later dropped the charges and apologized, but the ACLU sued the federal government on First Amendment rights infringement on the couple's behalf. And that is when the manual was made public under a subpoena. Joining me now, the host of the Rachel Maddow Show on Air America, Ms. Rachel Maddow herself. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Allison. Nice to see you.
One thing about this administration is it is organized when it comes to things like dealing with protesters. What does it say to you that this action plan existed even before the war started?
You know, maybe they were worried about people being mad that they hadn't caught Osama bin Laden yet. I don't know. It may be a historical accident, but this is dated, as you mentioned, October 2002. Now, what's the other big thing that happened in October 2002? Well, that's the month that Congress passed and Bush signed the war authorization that he would ultimately use to go to war in Iraq. So maybe that's what they had in mind when they came up with this really, really detailed plan.
Like I said, these are organized people in this administration. The manual says local officials should be encouraged to, quote, designate a protest area where demonstrators can be placed, preferably not in the view of the event or the motorcade route. It also says protesters, not really a big deal if the media can't see them. Doesn't this just seem to dismiss the very point of legitimately protesting? I mean, is it just to discourage people so people just phone it in?
Well, you know, I've been a protester in a previous life as an activist, and I've covered a lot of protests at presidential events and presidential candidates' events. And when you decide to make a political public statement, the reason you do it at a big public event that's going to get a lot of media coverage is because you want to be heard. I mean, otherwise you would do it in your basement where it's safer. But you do it at these events because you do want to get media coverage. And so, yeah, it bothers me that our White House, which is in charge of protecting our First Amendment rights and the rest of the rights granted to us by the Constitution, that they've got all these detailed plans to keep protesters from media coverage. But I'm more bothered by the stuff in here about protecting the president from seeing protesters. One of the reasons you'd choose to protest at an event that's being headlined by a politician is because, in part, you want that politician to see you. You want that politician to hear your message. And so there's no justification for shielding the president from protesters' views, even if you could come up with one conceivably for shielding them from the media.
It seems the manual, you know, you can read it online for all you Google folks out there. Go to Googling. A lot of it is about image, and it says, you know, put super enthusiastic VIPs right in the media's eye line, avoid physical contact with the protesters so that doesn't end up on video anywhere, outshout dissenters. I mean, frankly, it's a pretty wise strategy.
Well, yeah, I mean, even dictators could tell you that it's wise to have your goons not seen physically bum-rushing your law-abiding citizens, particularly when they're protesting against a president who's giving a speech about freedom of expression and freedom of speech, which is the topic of the speech that Bush gave on July 4th when Jeff and Nicole Rank were arrested for wearing those anti-Bush T-shirts. He was talking about freedom of expression. So, yeah, it's wise to avoid being seen doing the physical bum rush, but I don't exactly feel like that's a great bar that they've crossed over in terms of what we should expect from our White House.
Wouldn't any administration want to have a way of dealing with protesters, especially at campaign events? There have to be instructions for other commanders-in-chiefs or even presidential candidates to be.
Yeah, and to be fair, that's absolutely right. I mean, there have to be very intense plans for keeping the president safe and for keeping his events reasonably orderly so they can keep him safe. That's absolutely the case. But there is absolutely no justification for saying that protest pens need to be set up beyond the sightline of the motorcade. That's purely about shielding the president's own eyes from the protesters who are saying that they disagree with him. There's no justification for that whatsoever. It has nothing to do with safety. It doesn't even have anything to do with image control, because that's simply about shielding the president from those messages. I think that's just pathetic.
Air America's Rachel Maddow. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Allison.